here is the bolt that comes with the nibby throttle, and it mounts to the bottom. This hole right here in the center. That bolt goes through that hole. It's the one that has the nut on it. The problem is it's threaded the whole length. I want to remove the threads from part of this, and I'll explain why later. To do the thread removal, what I have to do is take the bolt, I have another one here, and I put it in my drill. So it's protruding, I'm clamping down on the head of the bolt. And what I'm going to do is spin the drill and take a file and just file off just until the threads are gone. I'm going to leave the extra width of the nut here on the end. Here's one for comparison. I want to leave some threads there, so I'm going to take off roughly the amount that's overlapping there. I want this to be a smooth shank, and I'll explain why later. The first thing I'm going to do here on the smart carb is fit my stock throttle cable into the adjuster. One thing to note here is that on this cable, the threads can't be screwed into the smart carb. The threads are a different pitch. So this is the brass adjuster that came with the smart carb. The cable just sits in there. I'm using the threaded section instead of a smooth shank because I don't have a choice. Anyway, this does work. Placing this in here, what I'm doing is adjusting this to take all the slack out of the cable. We come to the other end of the cable here. There's a second slack adjuster here. I've taken all the slack out of the cable. I'm going to start with the cable sticking out as far as it possibly can. Stuck it into the housing there. Because a cable, okay, I've now put the screw in and tightened it lightly. The cable, just to share, comes out this side. This is the side for the pulley here. You can see the cable comes out this side. Down in here, I don't know if this is going to focus with my iPhone, that bolt sticks up. It sticks up in there and it stops the throttle from turning. So it holds the cable on, but it also affects how far you can turn the throttle. That's because on the throttle there are flat sides here that as you open the throttle, this will come around and hit that bolt and only allow it to open so far. Same way here, when the throttle's closed, it will hit the bolt coming out of the bottom of the housing where my thumb is and prevent it from closing any further. So that is the more important adjustment. And then I think we're going to use the second cable hole right here. To aid with the process, I've done something else, and that's pulling the end of the cable to lift the slide inside the carb. And then I just jammed a piece of cardboard between the slide to keep the cable having some extra slack here. This gives me a little extra room to be able to attach the cable to the pulley for the throttle. And it's hard to do this with one hand. There we go. That will then fit in there a little bit easier. So once that's done, we can take the cardboard out, and that should take up most of the slack. Here we are back at the Kayo. I've installed the smart carb on the intake manifold here. Just 2 clamps. I'm not going to go into detail on that. The cable is routed over the top of the cylinder head and back in here in the V between the frame. To exit up, run along the cable guide there, around to the front over the master cylinder and back up to the handlebar. I fitted the throttle, you can see on the second adjustment. I put it on the third one here, and when I checked back here on the smart carb, the slide was lifted up a little bit on that third position. So I know number 2 is the one that I want to target. When I rotate the throttle open, it is working. It does extend all the way to the top, so I have ample throw. So at this point, well, need to fix that. I just need to tighten the bolts and assemble this down, and then we'll come back and take the slack out of the cable here and here on the front. And then we should be ready to put some fuel in it and start evaluating the jetting. This is a smart carb. It doesn't have jetting, but there is a knob on top of the carb to adjust it. It clicks as you go, clockwise for richer, counterclockwise for leaner. It's set up for a TTR 125 Yamaha. This is a Kayo, but it does have a very similar motor. I'm sorry, no, this is for the CRF 150 Honda is what I bought the smart carb for, because this is not my 125, it's my 150. Sorry, brain fart there. Anyway, I will adjust the rest of this and we'll check it out. But that's it for the smart carb install. Okay, here we are back at the carb. I have taken some slack out here on this adjuster. I actually did it on both because I want to kind of be in the middle of the range instead of use up 100% on one and none on the other. That one's about 1/8 of an inch. Same thing up here on the handlebar. You can see how many threads I have exposed there. About 1/8 of an inch. So tightening the nuts down. The throttle now has no slop in it. And if you check the slide operation, when I move it up and down, it is right where it needs to be initially speaking. So we will find out as we get this on the gas and actually start to run it, what else we have to do to tune it. Okay, let me see if I can show this. Where the cable comes through the end of the housing, there's, at the very bottom under the silver piece, is that rubber plug that fits in there. You'll see it's not flush with the aluminum housing. What's happening is the throttle's snagging on that rubber plug and it's not quite closing all the way. We ran into this problem in the races before. Yeah, I hope you can see it in there. That you need to take a razor blade and cut it down so it doesn't stick up as high as it does. It needs to be flush with the housing to stop the binding problem. Here's another view of that rubber plug. You need to cut the top off a little bit so that it doesn't protrude as far through the housing. Hope that makes sense. Second shot showing the plug. I cut it with a razor blade. Hope that makes sense. That's why I want it to be a little bit shorter. I've gone to put the tank back on so I can test run my bike, and I ran into a problem. The tank does not go down far enough. What is going on here on this side, if we can see it in there, is the throttle cable, where my finger is, sort of up in there. Well, it's hard to see. It hits the top of the gas tank. It basically is sticking up too far. That metal piece there on top of the carb. Silver coming out of the brass sticks up too far and hits the tank and doesn't let the tank lower. That means that metal piece needs to be bent, lowered, shortened, something to make it work. I'm not sure exactly how to cut that either, because cutting through the tube would cut through the cable. Time for a little bit of a redesign. Okay, this is the choice of solutions. Get out the Dremel, and what I've done is cut the threaded section off, being very careful to not cut through the cable. That's what I've done. I need to take the cable out and slide this section off, but hopefully this will allow the cable not to stick up as high. Only comment, when I was cutting this, I cut a groove at the separation of the threads, but I was really careful not to cut all the way through the tube because I didn't want to cut the cable. So I made a groove around it and then kind of wiggled it back and forth, and eventually it snapped off. So I need to take a metal file and clean that up, but that's hopefully how I'm going to solve the problem here. What it does mean is I'm going to have to go up and adjust the pulley up here to get that cable slack out. Remember, we used number 2 position for the cable end. I'm going to adjust it to use number 4 instead to take out some of that slack that I've just created by cutting this section out. That's about an inch worth of slack to have to remove. This may not work. We'll find out. Okay, here's yet another discovery. I can't get the threaded section off the end of the cable. The end of the cable here won't slide through the center of the metal. I should have known that. That's the way they build cables. So I'm going to have to somehow cut a slit in this so I can slip it off the cable, because I am not in the mood to make a custom cable at the moment. So we'll get the Dremel out and see if I can do something to fix that. Okay, this is my approach, is to hold the part I need to shave with vice grips and then take a Dremel and grind the top off until I get to the center section and can slip the cable out. I'm gonna keep it short here and show you the end result, but not the tedious 30 minutes of grinding. Okay, 30 minutes later, I was able to cut the end of the cable, work it loose, and I managed to do it without nicking the cable. Thank goodness. That's a huge amount of slack that's now sticking out of the cable. We'll have to put the carb back together, put the slide in, figure out how much cable slack we have to deal with, but hopefully we can fit the tank now. Okay, went to assemble this and run into the next problem. Where I cut off the tube, it does not fit inside the brass. Not sure how to deal with this. I'm going to try to bevel the edge of the aluminum silver tube there, see if I can get anything to fit in there. But basically that has to go inside the brass. Till I figure that out, I'm stuck. Okay, this is the finished result. I went around the outside of the shaft parallel and just kind of buffed the outside of the aluminum until I got to the point where this now fits over and slides over that shaft. It's a little uneven, but it does rotate and it does bottom out, so that's what I needed to do. Time to put it back together. Now we have our setup. I've reinstalled everything on the carb. Now we have a lot of cable slack to get rid of. It's roughly the width of my pinky. So going back up to the throttle, width of my pinky is roughly that distance between number 3 and number 2. So let's see what we can get out of this. Pinky width here. This does have to fit down into the brass a little bit, so there needs to be a little extra space. But let's start with number 3 and see if we can get the slack we need. Okay, I've done some trial and error. I hadn't taken all the slack out here. Took the slack out of this adjuster. Found out we had to put it in cable position number 4 there. With it set that way, this is no slack here. The tube is seated down there. And when we pull the throttle, you can see that the slide, whoops. Okay, I've tightened the housing because I want the throttle to work. It has a little bit of play, just a tiny bit. And again, there's the throttle slide. Just take the slack out, it's like 1 millimeter, and it lifts. So this is fully seating and closing, and it fully raises, and the throttle's open. So far, that looks good. Again, the throttle has just a little bit of slack in it, which is fine because we haven't made any adjustments here on the slack adjuster or up here at the front on this one. So we have the ability to take a little bit of that slack back out, and hopefully we can get 0 slop. So the good news is I think it's gonna fit with this little modification here. Now the question is whether I can put the tank on and have it clear. So let's get the tank back on and see. Okay, checking the operation of the throttle. Seems to be good. I took the slop out, the adjuster, put the boot back over. Back down here, the tank now drops down into the notch and is seated. Let's see if I can lift this up for a better view. So the tank down here, we can see the bottom of the tank just comes down and almost touches. But the good news is I don't get my finger stuck. The tank now sits where it needs to. We don't have an air filter in there yet. That's to come, but right now, just need to make sure the basics work. So I'm gonna put the tank back together, put the bike back together, and go right around a little bit. Hopefully, all we have to do is come back later and adjust the fueling. Clicker is on top of the tank. That is why I have this cutout here. You can take the bolt off, tip the tank up without having to take the tail section off. That way you can get into the clicker, make the clicker adjustments, put the tank back down, and ostensibly do that at the track in a matter of seconds, rather than a matter of 15 minutes to unbolt the carb and rejet it, which sucked. I don't think this is a performance enhancement. This is a tunability and maintenance enhancement for $600. Oh well. Okay, let's wrap this up. Have the Kayo, smart carbs on, tanks fastened, the fairings back on. So at this point, we need to give her a little push start and get moving. Tactics while the warm up there. Since I am freehanding this with my phone, we're just idling.